So VoxDev launched a little more than a month ago, and I think we're off to a fantastic start. We're as the board, we have a small but very active board. We meet by phone every week and talk about ideas. We talk both about research ideas, what's out there that's new that we think policy relevant, that we think policymakers in developing countries should have access to. But we also talk about innovative ways to get information both to researchers and to policymakers. One is through extensive use of videos, and we're always looking for video content, full-length lectures, short video sequences, things of that sort. The other is we've reached out to policymakers to get policymakers themselves to contribute to VoxDev. Our core audience, our core contributors, are likely to be academics who have policy-relevant research that we want to get, the results of which we want to get to policymakers. But it's extremely important for us as well that we get the view of policymakers themselves, that we reach out to them to understand what they see as the issues and what they see as the way that research might help them in developing policies and in implementing policies in their own countries. So it's been a lot of fun and very interesting to serve on the board, to be part of this venture. We've been actually working for almost a year, but really actively for about 6 months in preparing the site. And so also to see the site launch is fantastic. But for us, I think these meetings that we have every week are fun. They keep us sort of engaged in areas of research that we may not come across in our own little narrow silos as academics, and that I think is a benefit to us. But hopefully, it brings us closer to a set of ideas and a set of ways of conveying those ideas that make them more relevant for policymakers. So what do we mean when we say policymakers? I think we tend to think of policymakers as government officials, and certainly government officials are an important part of the policymaking community. But as someone who works on the private sector and private sector development in low-income countries, it's often other people other than the government who are the most important for us to reach and who we think of as policymakers. Those can be private firms themselves, they can be business associations, they can be nonprofits, they can be bilateral aid agencies or other aid agencies, and it's important that we not only reach that broader policy audience, but that we also have input from that broader policy audience, and that we think of policymakers not just as government officials, but also as a much broader set of actors who have an effect on development. When we think of policymakers, I think we want to think broadly about who policymakers are. Of course, government officials and ministers and others in governments, especially in governments in developing countries, are an important set of policymakers. But they're not the only policymakers that we need to be concerned with, or that we need to try to reach out to and draw in from. As someone who works on the private sector in developing countries, it's often the case that the people who are going to implement the policies that the research speaks to are not government officials, but private firms themselves, or industry associations, or nonprofit organizations, or bilateral aid agencies or others who are active in the private sector development space. And it's important that we also communicate with them. And communication, of course, means both directions, that we communicate what research has learned about these issues, but that we also that we get communication from them about issues that are important to them and problems or difficulties they face in implementing particular policies in their own environments.